It will take nothing short of 100 proof living to restore lives. Join a conversation between a cop and a criminal with Brian Yates and Chris Pridmore, working to inspire and motivate others, rebuilding the communication breakdown. This is the 100 Proof Living Podcast.
Well, welcome back to Conversations with a Cop and a Criminal. I'm Brian Yates.
And I'm Chris Pridmore. And I tell you what, I'm really looking forward to this show. This one's real personal. So early on in recovery, I had the pleasure of meeting somebody that was the very first person that I met that had what I wanted. You hear about in recovery circles, wanting what they have. And I found him in my friend Eric Foster. And I just want to say, Eric, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm really happy to have you meet my other friend, Brian, who has kind of picked up the baton. So
thank you for having me. And it's really my pleasure, Chris. It's been an awesome couple of years. It seems that's flown by, and
sure has.
Things have really taken on a whole new shape and form and picked up momentum. And life is really, really awesome right now. Brian, nice to meet you.
Yeah, you as well. I've heard so much about you, but I think maybe even more importantly, I think I've seen the kind of the fingerprint of your influence in Chris's life, and so much respect. And I'm grateful to you for sticking to kind of the calling on your life and to pouring into others. And I would maybe even just jump in with, can you tell us a little bit about kind of how the two of you came together, and maybe as honestly and as transparently as you can be, what were your first impressions of where he was at in his journey?
Oh boy.
Who was that for, you or me?
Eric, for you to reflect on meeting Chris, kind of how you came together, and then
real cool, Brian.
Hey, I don't mind pulling a pin in the hand grenade. I'm like 800 miles away.
Well, you know what? I got to be honest with you. When I first met Chris, when I laid eyes on him, I could see that there was a tremendous amount of emotion in him. I could see that there was a current just churning away in him, and there was a look of intensity that he possessed, and that kind of. Have you ever been in a room where you look around and you catch someone's eye, and there are people that you catch their eye and you look away, and there's just people that you catch their eye and you're like, you kind of look again because there's something there. And I noticed that about Chris. He has some special quality. Something was exuding coming out of him that kind of chimed with me. And I think it was the first or maybe second meeting where you came up and you approached me.
Yeah.
To keep it in context, back in that period of time in my recovery, I was real emotional. I had probably 4 minutes of speaking before I'd get choked up and start crying. Yeah. The amazing transformation that I was experiencing at the time was overwhelming in its intensity, and it was overwhelming in its miraculous nature. I could not get my head wrapped around that my life had changed so dramatically in such a short period of time, and I was a recipient of such unmerited favor that grace had just opened up the ceiling, the walls, and everything in my life just completely turned around and transformed. And in my expressing that, there was some sort of a bond that established itself between Chris and I. Mm-hmm. From our different perspectives, we shared something that was really, really deeply seated in both of us. And I believe now I believe that it was a knowledge of a spirit of God that was present in you and present in me that we had for so long not availed ourselves to experience, to bask in, to get in the flow of. And I think when I saw you, it kind of felt like there was a kindred spirit, and I felt like I was drawn to you. And I just thank God for you, because you say it to me all the time how much of an impact I may have had on you in your process. But I got to tell you, you've had a tremendous impact on me when you shared with me the things that you were struggling with and where you were going and the things that were important to you. Mm-hmm. I saw myself, and that just let me know that there was a purpose for me. And if for nothing else, I could focus on being there for you. And that really served me well.
I'll tell you what, I appreciated every minute of it. I can remember you've been so faithful, and you talk about the draw that was there. It really is what you just did, man. You just did it again. It's one of those things where you're about as real as it gets. There's no faking with you. I mean, I understood. I was sitting in a room with people I just didn't have faith in. I was coming out of a world that I had no faith in, and I'm sitting there across from a man that I could see is equally hurting like me, but is finding traction. And it just struck me. And then afterwards, your faithfulness. I don't know how many countless texts you sent me randomly that have absolutely applied to my day out of the absolute blue. And, and this is where I feel like you and Brian, it was really important for me to see the two of you guys together, because Brian is now at this level of this stage of recovery for me and maturity and that spiritual walk. It's been interesting that you guys both play an equal role. And I have to think that means that story is bigger than all of us.
Amen.
Yeah,
I like absolutely. To think that it's bigger than all of us. It makes me. I'm still at that pinch me stage. I can't believe it, and every day I wake up looking forward with tremendous anticipation and expectation to see what other miraculous things are going to occur. That I'm going to be allowed. I'm going to have the privilege that I'm going to get to be involved in, and I just can't. I can't wait. I can't wait every day.
Eric, let me throw something at you, and maybe you can address this. But you choose whether you address this from kind of a spiritual focus or through the lens of recovery. But you mentioned before that perhaps you sensed the Spirit of God at work in you. I'm certain that along the way you sensed some guiding principles towards sobriety. There was a time when you resisted that. There was a time when you, that's the best way to say it, is resisted it. Whether it was the Spirit of God, I stand at the door and knock, and He kept knocking, or maybe there were some decisions along the way from a practical sense that led you to need a road of recovery. Can you go back to that time and just what made you turn the corner? I mean, where was it? What was the big turning point where instead of turning left again, you actually turned right and brought you to the place where you're at now?
Thank you for the question, and I'm getting emotional now just thinking about it, because there have been many of those pivotal moments in my life. I grew up with a knowledge of God. My grandfather was a bishop in a large denomination in a large church, and I grew up with the business of church. And it was spoken over me at a very young age that I was going to follow in my grandfather's footsteps. Mm-hmm. And then I started going to school, and I went to college, and I'd never been in a co-ed dormitory before. And that had an impact on me.
This is a big smile.
Yeah, it had an impact on me, and I got sidetracked, and I started pursuing some things. I was an athlete, and I didn't really pass my Christian values onto my academic activities. And slowly I started to fall away, and I started to become attracted to the things that were not what I grew up with. And there are a lot more side avenues I could go down. There are a lot of experiences, but I believe wholeheartedly that every single situation that occurred in my life was for a purpose. Every sidestep, every misstep, every I'll say mistake, but I don't consider them to be mistakes. I think they're a part of a divine plan. If I hadn't gone through all those things, and just to let you know, I'm not a one-shot wonder. I have had many left turns, as you referred to. I have many, many examples of God's favor and God's grace preserving me. I have a criminal past that I survived because that was the plan. That was God's intention for me to survive. But there are many occasions that I can remember I'm talking with crystal clarity. I can remember thinking, I'm not going to survive this. There were many situations in a drug-induced state, trying to become even more drug-induced, where my body was not willing to cooperate, and I thought I wasn't going to survive those situations as well. But all those times, all those situations there was something that kept ringing in me. There was something that kept resonating in me, and I knew on some deep level that God had not turned his back on me, but I couldn't stand up to the challenge and really do what I felt was what he wanted me to do. I had some injuries, emotional and spiritual injuries, that took me years to get over. I charged God for some of the things that I had done and the decisions that I had made and the consequences of those decisions. I had a warped perspective. I had a warped understanding of, if God won't do this for me, then I won't do this for him. And I was at odds with God for about 35 years. I went through a tremendous wandering in the wilderness period, and it took 39 rehabs. It took 3 trips to prison. It took over 30 trips to county jail. I have lost count of how many detoxes, how many homeless shelters, how many homeless days, years. I can't say days, how many years of being homeless. And this is after college, Division I athletics, professional athletic aspirations, all those things. I needed to go through what I needed to go through so that God could get me to a place where I could listen. That's my feeling and my belief that it was intended for me to be where I'm at right now today, because there are so many men I pray on a daily basis that God would not allow those experiences in my life to be for nothing, that he would take those experiences that have shaped me and molded me and made me into the person that I am today, because I know that there is another man out there who is stuck in a pit of darkness and in their own hell, a hell of their own formulation, a hell of their own fabrication, that does not know that there is a way out. And that's the guy that God brings to me, and that's the guy I told him that I would be here for. And it has taken this period of time for me to develop a level of resolve that it doesn't matter to me what he looks like on the outside, because I believe wholeheartedly that God does not look at the outside of a person, but he sees their heart. And I want to get to the heart of the matter.
Oh,
and that's
powerful.
Yeah, it sure is. And that's what you did in my life, Eric. I mean, truthfully. And I feel like one of the things that's so effective about you as a human being is you're comfortable wherever you are, because one thing that I've learned from you too is that while you might not know the end result of what your purpose is, you know what your purpose is to be available in that moment as you're called. It's probably the biggest lesson I've learned from you over the season, is that this is an all the time thing. These commitments and promises we've made to ourselves, it doesn't matter so much what we've done for promises for other people if we aren't taking care of this relationship that we have with our higher power, with God. I'm curious, how do you sustain it? Because you're truthfully the most consistent human being I've ever seen in my life. How do you sustain that? How does that work for you? Because I know it's not, but unless I'm mistaking your story has not been all that easy.
No, it has not. And I'll tell you, the easy answer would be out of fear. I stay where I'm at out of fear. That's the easy answer. I'm afraid that all the misery and all the pain and all the destruction in my life can be reinstated, that I can get a refund on all that misery that I sold and I traded and God separated and delivered me from. I can get a rebate, a complete 100% rebate plus some interest if I decide that today is not the day that I'm going to ask God what his intention is for me today. That if today is not the day that I thank him for removing the obsession and the compulsion to drink, to drug, to hurt myself or to hurt other people, to live a violent criminal life, I am afraid desperately that I can get all that back, and I don't want that. But on the other side of that, God he's given me a vision of what the prize is. He has given me the vision that if it were not for people, there would be no purpose for what we do on a daily basis. And he has genuinely given me a love for people, because I believe, this is just me, I'm not trying to make anybody a convert, but I believe that the Bible tells us that there is a place that he has prepared for us, that where he is, I'm talking about Jesus, that where he is, we may be there also. And he said that in his Father's house there are many mansions, and if it were not so, he wouldn't have told us. And I believe that that is part of what he has blessed me with, that I have this vision of where I want to be, and where I want to be is where my God is. And I believe that it has been placed in my lap a phenomenal opportunity to really have an impact in the world. It's not a dollar value. It's not an acquisition of property or notoriety or any of that. But it comes down to, how can I relate to another human being that needs to know that there is a way out, that there is redemption, that there is restoration, that there is a process that they can become involved in that will give them a new, renewed view of life, and they'll be able to get a glimmer of what their true value is. I say this a lot to men that I talk to. If you had any idea how much God loves you, you would not make the decisions that you make for sheer response to that love. And that keeps me going.
Eric, it's interesting. I make an observation that Chris and I have talked about in the past, and, you talked about there were, many, many events prior to whatever the last event was, right? And so at some point you did kind of make that right turn, and I would agree that, God walked with you along that way. But I would say also too that, you said you grew up and you had truth spoken over you, and, whether it was your grandfather or whether it was other people in your church or just other, people in your life. And so, we look at that as kind of sowing seeds, and you, at an earlier time in your life, you were not ready to participate in the harvest. You were not, you weren't ripe for the lessons. You had to learn the hard lessons yourself. and we all do that in different ways. And it doesn't all have to be along the lines of a sobriety issue. It can be in other areas of, morality and fidelity and ethical business practices and all kinds of things that we struggle with. But what I would ask you is, in what you're doing now and in your focus and where you believe that you're answering the call on your life, I know that you interact with people and you can see it in their eyes and you can hear it in their language that they're not ready to make the change yet, but you still have an opportunity to sow those seeds of truth in their life. So to the people out there that might be struggling with something, sobriety or otherwise, and gosh, they sure know they should make a change, but in reality, they're not going to make that change tonight. But what would be some of those seeds that you would want to speak, just so that when the time comes, your words will echo in their head, and it might be something that slowly influences them to make that decision sooner than later, so that it's not an OD case or it's not an incarceration case. What would be the things you'd be saying to those people that it's what they need to hear, even if right now they're not ready to hear it?
I really have a mantra, and that is, my prayer every morning is, I thank God for removing the obsession, the compulsion to use, to drink, to drug, to hurt myself or hurt another human being. And I pretty much repeat that to the men that I come in contact with. I pretty much, I ask them, if you really had control over what was going on in your life, if you really had control and you could make things happen, what would you do? What would your life be like? If you could open your mind up and have all the negative things that are in your mind taken out of your mind and replaced with whatever you would consider to be good, wholesome, prosperous, what would you put? What would you put in there? And a lot of the guys don't have the slightest bit of self respect. They don't value themselves at all. And if I've had an opportunity to talk with them for any length, I ask them about the people in their lives. I ask them about, and just like you said, and you said it correctly, there were many, many seeds sown in me. And that's another reason why I believe that all the experiences, all of them, good and bad, were instrumental in me arriving at the place where I am. Who's to say that had my grandfather not preached to me and sat me in front of him and recited scripture and had me listen to, Bible audio tapes and books and records, who's to say that I would have been able to respond when it was ripe, when all the events in my life came to a head. So I believe wholeheartedly that the men that I interact with, that they need to have seeds sown as well. And I just ask them, if you had a son, if you have a daughter, if it's your sister, if it's your mother, if it's your brother, if it's your aunt, uncle, or cousin, what would be the things that you would want for them? And if they can give me an answer of the positive, they have some forward-thinking idea about other people, then I make it my goal to have them reflect that and try to apply those same things to themselves. And a lot of times the men they're hard-pressed to outdistance the negativity that they're dragging along with them.
Right. Now, I think it's important for our audience to understand, when you talk about the men that you speak to, the context, a little bit of that. Actually, I just found out today that you and I work for the same agency. As close as we are, we didn't realize that we were in the same agency together. So it's kind of funny how that works. Mm-hmm. But, your influence and the scope of it has been pretty interesting. And you talk about that collective, embodiment of your experiences and really where it's taken your purpose. And if you want to share, you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about where, the people that you interact with on a day-in-a-day-out basis and these men that you're speaking of. Yeah,
I do kind of speak vaguely in general terms about the men. My prayer was that. Well, Brian, you asked about if there was a single event, if there was a turning point this time around, and 3 years ago, on this coming up Halloween, I was in a crack house. I was involved in illegal activities. I was having relationships with a woman that was not my wife, who was having relationships with other men in order to continue to fuel our drug purposes, the things that we wanted to do. And I had my life threatened that night. Drug dealer wanted money that we didn't have to give him, and he evicted us out of the area of the house where we were sleeping and started destroying the house. And I, being a military veteran and having grown up in a pretty macho environment, I was surprised at the level of fear that I was experiencing with relationship to this man, and that totally disarmed me. I couldn't believe that I was cowering in front of this person who was less than half my age. I outweighed by, a significant amount, but I had been reduced to this quivering mass of flesh by virtue of the lifestyle that I was living. And in that moment, I felt this most consuming and overwhelming sense of doom that I could not shake. I couldn't get away from. I was on probation and in violation of probation. I was afraid to go out in the daytime for fear of being arrested. And I was stuck in a drug-induced cycle where I couldn't get high enough. I couldn't get drunk enough. I couldn't have sex enough. I couldn't do anything enough to assuage whatever this gnawing, grinding, ravenous thing that was going on inside of me. And then all of a sudden, I had a moment of clarity. And I thought, if I don't leave here, I'm going to die, that my life was going to be over. And the person that was there, the woman whose house it was, she was sleeping on the couch and I was sleeping on the other couch. And I still had phone numbers of people that were doing the right thing, people who had been praying for me for 15 years, some of them longer than that. When I would have periods of recovery and sobriety, I would run back to the church and I would try to get my life on track. And in this moment, there were people that when I called, they answered the phone and I said, I need to get out of here and I need to get away from here or else I'm going to die. And I had no more desire from that moment on. I had no more desire to drink, to drug, to participate in any, and it just came just like that. And I was standing in the living room and I was looking around, and with the same wide-eyed amazement as I have when I look around and see where God has brought me, I looked around and I said, how did I get here? I couldn't believe that I was there. And I was blessed with some recall, and it was some euphoric recall. I was remembering joyful times in my past. I was remembering poignant times of interaction with other people that were significant in my life and that were pivotal moments, defining moments in my life. And I realized that I was so far from that, and I couldn't believe that I had gotten to that point. And for that one moment, I took a deep breath and I actually stood up straight and I said, I don't have to be here. And somewhere in the depths of who I am, in the depths of this person that God created, there was a little flicker of hope that started to be fanned into a flame. There was an ember that said, you don't have to be here. And that was a turning point. And it was almost like an audible voice that said, you don't have to live like this. You don't have to die, and that's what's going to happen to you if you stay here. And I stayed sober for the next entire day in that house, and it wasn't until the next morning that my friend was able to come and pick me up. And I went, and it's been nothing but amazing, miraculous, phenomenally supernatural occurrences. And I mean that in the practical sense, that any person consumed by the obsession and compulsion and the insanity of drug and alcohol addiction and the other things that come with a life, a negative life, it's amazing that a person can be delivered from those things, can be restored from that state, a seemingly, as the AA book says, a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, and being restored and recovered from that.
Yeah, it's you honestly, every time I hear your stories, it's shocking to me, and it's so encouraging because I know you've been through a lot in your life. And the thing that always amazes me about you, truthfully, Eric, and I'm sure that the clients you work with the military clients and things like that you help, is their consistency through all things. So even with your life, you've had recent challenges that you shared to me, and you just don't skip a beat. It seems like every time I talk to you, no matter what's going on, you've disciplined yourself to a place you always look to where your strength is. And that's been a huge lesson for me because you said I was intense when we first met, emotional. That's an understatement. I mean, and so I was wired. When you saw me first, I was wound up. And that's still a challenge for me, is to stay in that spot. And so I think that for those around you that are also wound up, one of the gifts that you offer them is the stability that you've learned over all these seasons and seeds that have been planted in your life. That stability is unbelievably valuable commodity, especially in the recovery community. Even those that have had seasoned recovery, you and I see it all the time, where people aren't necessarily stable. That stability and knowing where your hope is anchored to is so evident in your life.
Thank you. I like that phrase when you said their hope being anchored. I'm not responsible.
Yeah.
I didn't do it. I'm just, and they have a movie called Witless Protection. And I say this often to my guys, it's amazing what God can do with a lump of dirt. Once he breathes life into that lump of dirt, that lump of dirt has choices. It can make decisions.
Eric, you commented on this, and I guess I'm coming around to kind of agree with this idea that sometimes it takes hitting that rock bottom, and sometimes it takes hitting multiple rock bottoms before someone, actually maybe it is that kind of knocks something loose and gets them to think more clearly. But if you could go back and talk to a younger version of you that still had a good 5 to 10 rough years ahead of him, what would you tell him? What would you want to say now that might have prevented some pain, that might have prevented something? This whole idea of what we're trying to do is not just share messages of transformed lives, but to actually then help to transform lives with that information and with the good news of, what has happened in our lives through the gospel, through good peer coaching, through all of the different things where we try to use as touch points. But what would you go back and say now that, might have some value or might even maybe speed up that clock a little bit to swim upstream with Eric Foster?
Hurry up. Get done with what you're doing so that you can get on with living. And that was said to me 15 years ago. I was on the street, and a man that I had met in Narcotics Anonymous, I saw him, and I was panhandling, trying to find some money so I can continue doing what I was doing. And he looked at me, and he looked right at me. He didn't look through me. He wasn't looking around me. He got right in my eyes, and he looked at me, and he says, you know where your home is, and you know what your life can be like. He said, and all I'm hoping is, and I'm praying that you will survive whatever it is you're going through. But whatever you're doing, hurry up and get it out of your system. Hurry up and get over with. Hurry up so that you can get on with your life. And this is a real thing for me. I have a 20-year-old son that I love dearly, who 3 years ago would not talk to me. And he's going through trials of his own. And I've been afforded an opportunity to take this, whatever this is that God has given me, and apply it right where it is most emotionally significant to me. Because I prayed for 5 years to be able to have a paternal instinct towards this young man. And God granted that. He answered that prayer. And now he's allowing me to sow those same seeds that were sowed in me. And the message I give my son, that it doesn't matter what it is you do, it doesn't matter where you go, you need to know that you are always going to be loved, that you are a valuable human being, and that God has a plan for your life. And it's beyond your wildest expectations. And I would say to me, really, really get done with what you're doing. Take a hard look at the people that are in your life and open yourself up to receive the love that they have to offer you, and really believe it and take it to heart. There was an underlying current of doubt and fear and mistrust for me for some reason. I didn't get into it tonight, maybe another night, but my parents had their own struggles, and so I grew up in a very unstable household. Although my grandfather was a pillar, my father was ruinous. He had some issues, and so I grew up in a very violent home, alcohol and drugs, and so there were some other elements that were at play. So I now try to not have that be a part of my interaction with my son, and I would probably say that to me, that, just try to find that path to receive the love that's out there.
Mm-hmm. A lot of wisdom in that.
That's incredible. Brian, he brought up your value. He's coaching to his son and value, and we're, at just about the end of the show here. And Eric, I don't know if there's anything that you would want to close with our audience to that you could tell them about now. If there's anything that you could, other than what you've already said, that's been so powerful. Is anything you'd like to leave them with?
Yeah, that you have no idea the things that can happen in your life with one or two minute changes. Me admitting that I don't know everything and accepting that there is always going to be somebody smarter, there's always going to be somebody better looking, there's always going to be someone with more money than me, and there's always going to be a person that I'll look at and I'll think that that person has got nothing, absolutely nothing, no redeeming qualities, nothing of value that I could ever learn from. But that's not true. So it doesn't matter who you are, there is a purpose in your life, and that there is something miraculous that can happen for you. And if God can take this lump of dirt, and to this juncture in my life, I was a convicted felon. Now I work for the federal government. And don't ask how that happened. And I was I just applied for a passport because I've gotten an idea from, I believe God's given me an idea to go on the mission field. And so with my felony passed, I went and jumped through all the hoops that Homeland Security and the Passport Administration wants, and they awarded me a passport.
Wow. That's awesome, man.
I went from riding a bicycle, from walking, and from all that. I'm driving a vehicle. I have a driver's license, even.
We haven't determined whether you're a good driver or not, but that's pretty cool that you got that. Well, that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
For real. Well, Brian, it sounds like he teed you up with your
absolutely. And so, Eric, there's some work that I've done in the past that I've developed a mantra for as well, and it just seems like it echoes so much of your story and more importantly, the values that you certainly hope to impart to your son and your grandfather and others imparted to you. And I love the way that you said it, that just if people just knew how much God loves them, and I think as followers of Christ, we are then compelled to love others that much. And so this mantra is based on this idea of do unto others as you would have them do unto you, but it takes it down to the most fundamental level, to say that I'm not perfect, nobody is, I have value. Everybody does.
Eric, thank you so much for joining the show, and we appreciate the audience for tuning into 100 Proof Living. And our new tagline, I can't think of a better embodiment of it, is that in you and in your life, and that is that we believe that changed lives change lives. And I just want to thank you for all that you're doing.
Thank you for having me.